What is going on, everyone? It's your boy Gsluke here with our live stream for this week's Houston Open. Gonna get you guys ready for all of your exposure this week. With any questions you've got for me down there in the chat, we'll go through a weather report, some of the strategy and ownership like we typically do for DFS. We'll talk about some of the contests on Draftkings, all of that sort of jazz. And then towards the end, if you're an underdog and a prize picks enthusiast, they've got you covered from the prop side as well. So we're gonna go through some stat averages, a few props that have already entered over there as well. But anywhere you'd like me to go out there and fill in the cracks or any of those questions are exactly how we can do so. So feel free to go ahead and hit me up with anything that you've got. You got James down there, Emin Hala down there early to the chat as well. What is going on? We got Jamari, also Ross and Dave, who, by the way, he says decide to win there. That is the name of my book, if you guys haven't seen it already, which, by the way, was a bestseller over there on Amazon. So it's a really good read if you guys haven't already checked it out. And yeah, let's decide to win this week, right? You got to go out there. You got to decide ahead of time that you're going to be putting in more effort, more work than all of your competitors. Let's go out there and make it happen, man. But it started off with a look at the golf course. Then we're going to get into some of your questions when I bring up the player pool stuff, because I like to talk about the elephant in the room right off the bat, which is typically going to be the weather forecast. And for the first few days, it does look like it's going to be something that we have to keep an eye on. So let's go over here to the HRRR model and take a look at Thursday, where you can see that as the day goes on, it looks like the winds are going to start to crank up. So maybe from about 7 to about 10, it looks pretty calm from the sustained winds perspective. Nothing upwards of 6 miles an hour. But by the time we get to closer to 11 or even noon there, it creeps up to 8 to even 10 miles an hour. And your wind gusts, which were 10 miles an hour to start the day, even a hair below that over there towards 7 a.m., are upwards of 20 miles an hour out there from 1 p.m. onwards. That on top of some rain that is in this current forecast could make for slightly harder conditions as the day goes on. But really where the massive weather edge could come in is what happens on Friday. Because if you guys haven't seen the forecast, you might be living under a rock out here for this week. The GFS is typically the most accurate this far out, and it is going to be a complete washout. There are flood warnings over there in the Houston area. You're talking about so much rain. I mean, they're not used to this sort of rain over here in the area. And that's on top of about a half an inch to an inch overnight. So it's already going to be a soft golf course. And then during the morning wave, you got some wind. You can see over there in that forecast. And then also quite a heavy drizzle out there the entire morning. So if they play through it, that would be dreadful conditions, right? Soft, cool weather, also a sustained rain almost the entire time, would play significantly harder, obviously, than the rest of the day. But I would say that with all this different rain that you have in the forecast here, some of the models, by the way, if we go over here to the ECM forecast, for example, they're calling for thunderstorms over there on Friday morning. All of that could lead to a delay, right? If you have that much standing water on the course, the potential of thunderstorms over there towards midday, if they end up having to suspend play, and then maybe, right, the AM guys don't quite finish their round over there on Friday morning, maybe the PM wave doesn't even get to start until very late over there on the Friday, well, they would be at a massive advantage, because you can see over here, right, there's even another thunderstorm over here on this ECM model over there on Friday afternoon, but Saturday looks absolutely divine. You're talking about sub 5 miles an hour of sustained winds. Even your wind gusts don't really kick up until the afternoon there. If we take a look at GFS, which I would say is the most accurate of all these models, more than a day out. HRRR is what you use within 24 hours. But you can see over here on Saturday that it looks calm out there for the first half. And if that PM wave from Friday, so the AM PM guys, or the guys that I'm talking about here, have to finish their round up on Saturday morning, that would be to their benefit. They could play a half a stroke, even a stroke easier there. And then when you add on top of that the fact that tomorrow, it kind of looks like it's going to be harder out there in the PM, right? Some rain, also the winds kicking up a little bit. I could see an argument for taking those AM PM wave players. And in fact, out there in my exposure, I took 30% of my lineups and only stacked them towards that side. And my player pool is like 60, maybe like 65% guys there on the AM PM side. So there are still some players that I'm taking from the quote unquote bad wave, right? Scotty Scheffler, even some guys towards the middle to the bottom end of the board, because I don't think this is any sort of definitive edge, right? They could have to play through it, and then all of Friday could be absolutely dreadful. Right? If they have to play all day Friday, let's assume that there's no thunder that comes through. It's not like the PM is going to be easy, right? It's still supposed to rain pretty much the entire day on Friday, just maybe the wind's kicking down a little bit. I could see it being being close to maybe like a half a stroke difference, really not all that big of a difference. So not the one that you'd have to go all in on. But I think that if there's a delay, right, that's where it could become maybe a stroke and a half difference. So that's why I'm going out there and playing it in 30% of my lineups, because I think there's a circumstance, right? Obviously, we don't know exactly what's going to happen ahead of time where they could get that big of an advantage, but not the, perfectly clear forecast that we're looking for. And even if it is a perfectly clear forecast, right? Look at last week, right? It looked pretty definitive out there last week, and it only ended up being like a 0.7 shot difference when it was all said and done. So that's why you got to be a little bit careful when it comes to these weather edges. I will say that if I was playing round one showdown, that I would almost for sure go after some of the early starters. They are currently getting a little bit of a drizzle over there at the golf course. So I do think it'll be super soft out there tomorrow morning. That combined with the fact that the winds aren't going to kick up until about 11 local time makes me think that there's going to be some pretty good scoring to be had out there. So that's the other thing to consider over here for Thursday, is that for showdown, you might want to go after some of the early starters as well. So it's pretty much no matter what slate you're playing, right? I think that's the side that is going to get the better side of the draw, but just make sure you stay on top of these forecasts, right? These things can change rather drastically, especially when we have a forecast on Friday that is so volatile. I mean, some of them are calling for rain the entire day. Some of them are calling for pockets of dryness, right? Like you can see over here on this ECM model on Friday, right? It's not a steady stream the entire day. Who knows what's going to happen? But I do know that they have the flood warnings over there in the Houston area. So they're certainly expecting a lot of rain to come down. Like this one, look at Medio Blue. Like it's as steady as it can possibly get when it comes to the forecast. Also, a lot of thunder over here on this sort of forecast. Just a lot of unknown when it comes to any sort of weather edge. So tread with caution when it comes to all that sort of stuff. But let me bring up my projections. We're going to open it up to questions now. So if you guys have any players you want to deep dive on, feel free to go ahead and let me know. But we're going to have ownership on here for the top end of the board. So that'll be from 8K plus. We have all the ownership over here. That's a large field GPP ownership, by the way. So we're going to talk through some game theory towards the top end of the board. But any players you want to deep dive on, feel free to go through any stats that you want to together. We got the last 24 rounds, last 12 rounds. We could talk about how they set up for the golf course if you guys want to do that sort of thing. And then any strategy questions as well. It's a good time for it. But let me catch on in chat, see what's going on. I saw a few of you guys filing on in there. The first thing I need from you is to smash the like button if you guys haven't already, and smash the subscribe button as well so you guys don't miss any of the content to come. What's going on, Mike? Appreciate the kind words there. Same thing with Michael. He said, thank you for the show. Of course. We got Ryan down there too. Well, I like the call on Jake Knapp there. He said he gets his second win this week. I think it's a good golf course for it. A little bit of a Mexico Open comp, if that's your sort of thing. You live here locally, you said? I've been saying that there's possible flooding getting as high as 4 to 6 inches. That's what I mean. Like Friday, there's a chance they don't even play golf at all. So it's we'll see what happens for the sake of the golf course in the event. I hope they don't get 4 to 6 inches, because if they do, they're probably not playing, and that might mean a 54-hole event. But we'll see how it all plays out. Going on, Tack? He said, thanks for the content. How should we be playing the weather wave, if any? So yeah, I just went through that in detail. So if you have any specific questions on top of that, man, I'm more than willing to go through them, but maybe you just tuned in after we finished going through it. If you go back about 2.5 minutes, you can get exactly what you're looking for. So top 3 first round leaders from the AM wave. I haven't bet any first round leaders, so I don't really have that insight for you, Kim. If any come to mind, I guess I'll let you know as we go through the player pool, but not really something I've done yet, so I don't have a great answer for you. And when I'm betting first round leaders, right, it's not like I just like pick names out of a hat, right? I have to do my due diligence. I've got to go through some of the round one poppers, that sort of thing. So that's why I don't want to like half-ass it and give you an answer, right? Like I'm sure a lot of touts, a lot of other shows out there would just throw out 3 names so that you can go out there and bet. I'm not going to do that, though, right? I want to be able to give you everything fully confident. What's going on, Ryan? Said thoughts on Sawheth this week. So I like the fact that it's a wide open golf course, not really a huge missed fairway penalty, which a lot of times had played into his skill set, especially when he was new out here on tour. What I will say, though, is that he's not doing anything well recently. Like his iron play has been a little bit off. He's not putting to the standard that we're used to. So, if you're willing to take a shot on a player at low ownership, then it's okay to go out there and play a guy like Sawheth. I mean, he's got all the top end upside you'd hope for. He's a world-class player, PGA Tour winner sort of player out here on the tour. But it's a huge but, though, right? He's got that downside because of that poor recent form. You saw that there were areas getting the most rain, or the coastal areas. I did see that, James. So the golf course is a little bit further inland. So maybe that's a good thing for the golf course. Any thoughts on Grazerman? So he's on the proper side of things, Kevin. I've also got him, I believe he's 8K plus, so I can show you his exact ownership. But I've got him like average to even slightly below average ownership over here in the 8K range. The issue is that the form doesn't really stand out. He's hardly getting to the field over his last 12 measured rounds. So he's not my favorite play. A lot of that coming because of the form. It really isn't that great, but he's not the worst play either. Like, if you're willing to take a shot on somebody on the proper side of things, like kind of like a Sahith Theegala, I like him at courses that are a little bit more wide open off the tee. He's not very accurate with the driver, but he does hit it a long way. It sets up well from that perspective. So Sahith, by the way, also on the right side of things, and you can see in that same ownership range. So I would say that they're pretty much the same play to me. I would say Sahith maybe the better putter on this surface. So if I was comparing the two, I guess that'd be the one thing to really differentiate between them. Because, I mean, look at the form, right? 0.1 strokes as opposed to 8/100ths of a stroke gained per round. It's as close of a play as you can possibly get. Am I considering any Rory Scotty lineups gets really ugly in the depths? Yeah, I'm sure I'll have a few, man, but it's not my favorite build. It really forces you down to that 6K range. And I think the 7K range has a lot of guys that are viable to win this event, and definitely top 10 equity over there in that 7K range. So it's not my favorite play. Like, you might be able to mix in one, maybe two 7K guys out there in that sort of build, but I mean, probably at most one actually out there with those two players. It's not my favorite sort of build. Hey, Luke, you said thoughts on Taylor and Novak. So Nick Taylor, not the best course fit, I would say, but the form has been above average, right? He's, I believe, in the top 50 of form of players out here in this field. Andrew Novak, too. I mean, he's kind of sneakily been showing up at all these different golf courses, API, signature events. He went out there and had that Sunday resurgence. I think it was like a -6 round, something like that, out there in really tough conditions. I would say I like Novak a little bit more than Nick Taylor, because it feels like Nick Taylor's taken a step back maybe over his last start or so. Hasn't quite been up to the standard that you saw maybe a month and a half ago out there for Nick Taylor. But Novak, he still has some of that magic going right now. So, thoughts on both? I put him at a 6 out of 10. Solid form players. They really don't stand out all that much from the course fit perspective, but the kind of guys that, I mean, if you're trying to just get guys in your pool that are playing solid golf, which is never a bad thing, by the way. And I think that's something that you should be looking for in a lot of different cases, are just guys that are playing solid golf that you can throw into your pool and feel decent about out there, maybe like 10, 12% exposure. Those are those kind of players for me. Like, I would never use a Novak or a Taylor in like 15 to 20% of lineups. But if I need a filler play in that 10 to 12% range, then they're perfect for that sort of thing. You said Mav. Let's see. So you cut off the question. Mav, about the same as Max and Theegala. I actually think Maverick's a better play. And then, so I don't want to steam him up too much here, but I think Matt McNeely sets up particularly well for this golf course. And a month and a half ago, he was contending at the Genesis. He had won during the fall swing. I mean, he had turned into a monster, right, towards the end of 2024. I would say that he's a much better player than everyone around him. I think he's a better player than everyone the whole way up to Wyndham Clark. Wyndham Clark is better than Matt McNeely, at least as of right now. Might not be the case after this year. I may have to adjust my rankings on those two players, but Matt McNeely is better than all of these guys right now. Now, I'm not talking about Jason Day's career, right? He's a Hall of Famer. He's on another level, clearly. But as of right now, give me Mav over every single one of these players. And I don't care about the form right now. You give me a head-to-head Mav McNeely versus every single one of these players, I'll bet it at plus 100 odds. And in fact, if anyone can find me a matchup of Mav versus any of these players at plus 100 odds, let me know. I'll bet it. And if anyone wants to book me that sort of matchup, I'll take it as well, because like I said, I think he's like clearly the better player out of the bunch there. And it's not even like the form's been terrible. Like, this is what I don't understand about Mav this week. And I said I wouldn't talk all that much because I didn't want to steam him up. But here we are out here on the Mav McNeely rant. Why is he $8,300? Why is he lower owned than everyone else around him? He's still gaining strokes to the field. He's still gaining like a half a stroke per round to the field. He's still solid with the ball striking. Now, I know it's not as eye-popping as what it was maybe a month ago, putting, doing a lot of the work out there, but sure, he's had a few bad events off the tee, right? Florida swing, that'll do that to players. It's an event, it's a swing where there's water on almost every single drive. You go back to the last 24 rounds and you start to see why you'd want to play Matt McNeely. The iron play, the putting has been on point for quite some time. And it's not even like he's playing in weak field events. confidence now that he has the win, now that he has, and he's still top 20 out there in the FedEx Cup standings right now. Because he's towards the top, he doesn't play in these slapdick events anymore. So this is one of the few events that he's played that's a weaker field event this year. I think you're really going to see him outshine some of these other players. And I hate to pick on Bridgman because I bet him outright last week. He did me a lot of good. He was the top DraftKings scorer last week, by the way, Jacob Bridgman. So if you played him, he did you a lot of good out there in your lineups. So I don't want to crap on him too much, but the fact that he's higher owned than Matt McNeely is blasphemous. I know the form maybe a little bit better out there with Bridgman, but I feel like people are assuming that he's like in God form, which he kind of is, right? Gaining over a stroke and a half per round, but Matt McNeely isn't that far behind. So yeah, that's the Mav take. And if you can't tell, I like him. Thoughts on Ben Griffin? So sneaky good course history, Cody. He makes a lot of birdies around here. And in fact, he's played a lot better than the positions would actually indicate. So if you go down here, where's he at? There he is. So T36 and then a 16th place finish. Last year, he was a top 15 DraftKings score, despite that T36 finish. And then that T16 finish, he was a top 10 DraftKings scorer that week. So the kind of guy that he could fill it up with the putter. He obviously likes his overseed as well. So I'm all for playing him this week. In fact, and on the overseed, he gains 0.3 strokes per round. Earlier this year, it was closer to like 0.5, 0.6 strokes per round. So I would argue that he could probably be even better out there on these greens. Any thoughts on punting a guy like Willett or Snedeker this week? Not necessarily long, but showing signs of life. Oh, that's ugly, man. I don't think I can do it. I don't have either of those ones in my pool, and I kind of have a role for myself, man. I don't play guys that could be on the senior tour, and I know that both of those guys aren't quite there yet. But when you've got young studs down in that range that have got birdie or better firepower, like I could see one of those two cracking a top 20, but it's not going to be a top 20 with 25 birdies, right? Like if Zach Johnson or Willett make it out there into the top 10, it's because they grinded out pars all week. Like Willett last week, for example, I think he had like 26 straight holes with a par, which is just Danny Willett golf, right? That's what he does. That's why he plays well at majors, even this far into his career now. I would stay away from those kind of guys because even if you get them right, man, you're only going to get so much scoring out of them. Like maybe you play Zach Johnson at a birdie fest because he can fill it up with the putter at times, but I wouldn't do it here. You said, love it. Thanks for the confirmation. There you go, Emin Holla. Hopefully he pays us off in our lineups this week. You got Casey says, Matty Schmid. I've got to say, I think that's a sharp take. He's got the power you need for this sort of golf course. Driving accuracy can be a problem for it at times, but at a golf course that's a muni course like this, there's only 2 tee shots, by the way, where you even have water in play. That's beautiful for Matty Schmid. So, and by the way, the fact that he played so well during the Florida swing is a huge plus for him because those golf courses don't set up that well for him. You said you're late. What do I think about the totals tomorrow on AM versus PM? So yeah, we'll talk about the prop side a little bit later, Ernie, but I think the morning will be easier than the afternoon. The winds aren't really going to kick up until about 11, maybe 12 is when they're kicking up to about 10 miles an hour. So I think that'll make a pretty big difference with the scoring tomorrow. He said, I don't know if I missed it, but have I talked about Rory making his debut? I have not yet. So it's a perfect segue into what we're going to do here, Jamari. So I love Rory this week. I took him for an outright at plus 750. So if you want to know my take in short, I love him this week. I went out there and took him outright because of the course fit. I know it's his first time playing here at Memorial Park, but it makes perfect sense on paper. A lot of mid to long irons, a golf course where you can really lean into that driving distance, right? Driving accuracy essentially means nothing around this kind of golf course. And you saw players last year just go and bomb it away. Like you had guys like Steven Yeager in round 2. I believe he shot like a -8, a -9, something like that. He had the round of the day out there in round 2 last year. He went from even par to way under, like up there in the top 5. He hit like one fairway the entire day because I remember betting his over on birdies out there in round 2 last year and him making birdie from the woods. And there's not that many trees out here on this golf course, but he did that like 3 or 4 times. So even when you miss in the spots that you can't miss around here, like under trees, right? The whole patch around you, you can still get out of trouble. That's how easy it is off the tee around this golf course. So Rory McIlroy, I mean, he's just going to be smashing the ball the entire week. And then when you give him the perhaps a little bit of a weather edge on top of that, that's why I really like Rory this week. So to answer your question, I love him, even though it's his first time playing here. That experience is going to be helpful. And I think it's a good time to talk about the ownership here too. I've got no idea, a couple things with the ownership. no idea, first off, why I'm the only ownership source that thinks Rory is going to be higher owned than Scotty. I might be wrong because ownership can be a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. A lot of times you pull out ownership and that causes adjustments out there in the rest of the industry. But Rory McIlroy is the better form player out of the two. That's not an opinion. That is just stats over their PGA Tour stats this year. He's cheaper. He's $1,000 cheaper. That makes a huge difference when you're going out there and building your lineups. He projects higher than a Scotty Scheffler. Now, it's just my projections. I'm sure there's other ones out there where it's the opposite, right? Where Scotty goes out there and leads them. But is it a big enough lead between the two where you can say that you think Scotty at $1,000 more expensive is going to be higher owned? And to me, I think that's a mistake. I think in maybe some single entries, right, some smaller GPPs, you might catch a smaller field contest where Scotty is, right, higher owned to the two. But at least as of now, you can see where my take is, right? Out there in the large field GPPs, I think Rory is going to be the more popular player. And that's not what I want to happen, right? A lot of people, I feel like when they put out their projections, they adjust them for what they hope is going to happen, which is, I have a word for that I'm not going to use on live stream because it's not the nicest thing to say, but I have a word for people that think that sort of thing. They're not the most intelligent people out there. Let's put it that way. So leaving $1,000 on the table to take a better player, I think it's just common sense, right? That Rory McIlroy would be higher owned. So we'll see. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's a reason why all these other sites have Scotty Scheffler higher owned, but I think it's silly right now to go out there and say that sort of thing. The other thing with ownership that I put out a tweet on earlier, every single site, and I checked all the big ones. I'm not going to exempt any of them. Every single one of them had something wrong with their ownership this week, whether it wasn't adding up to 600%, whether it was spending way over $50,000 out there with your projections, or way under. There was one site that spent $47,500 out there with the projections. There was one that spent $52,500 out there with their projections, which, by the way, if you don't know what that means that if you take the projected ownership and you multiply it by a player's salary, you can get the projection of how much salary on average, right, each player is going to take up. So the reason why that's important, by the way, is you have to know what your average salary used is, because people spend all of their salary, right? It's very predictable out there with over 99% of your lineups, people are going to spend within $400, $500 of the maximum. So if your projected ownership does not come within $400, $500 of the maximum, what the hell are you doing, right? If you're spending over $50,000 in your projections, like a lot of the projections we're doing this week, and by the way, the reason for that, they wanted to project Scotty Scheffler and Rory really high, but they didn't account for it down the line, right? They went, okay, sure, people are going to play Scotty and Rory this week, and they might be right about that, right? Their projection might be correct on those two players, but what they didn't do is they didn't account for all the cheap guys you need to make that work. The guys in the 9K range that have to be lower owned, right? Because of all the people getting to those two players up top. And I've got to say, I look around the industry like any other good tout would do, right, to see where maybe I'm getting things wrong when it comes to the ownership, and also to get an idea of maybe who's getting steamed up by different projection sources. And I've got to say, I was absolutely appalled by what I saw. And I subscribe to like 8 or 9 of the different big sites out there. Every single big one that you can think of, not one of them, literally not a single one of them, could follow those two simple rules out there with their projections. Not a single one of them. I mean, that's why I had to go out there and make a whole spreadsheet about it, because it is utterly embarrassing that people are paying for those sort of projections. And that's not to say that I'm telling you to go out there and cancel your subscriptions and come up to sign to mine, right? I'm not going to be that sort of scummy guy that goes out there and says that. But what I will say is that maybe hold your projection sites accountable, right? This is not something that's hard to do. In fact, I'm going to show you how to do it here together so that you can hold the sites accountable yourself, just to show you why I'm doing this. So this is all you have to do. This is simple Excel. Everyone can do this. You don't have to be a data scientist to go out here and do this sort of thing. You do an enter sign. You click on the price thing over here. You type in the multiply. You multiply it by the ownership. That right there, you're going to have to divide by 100, because this isn't 30.3%, right? It's just 30.3 that we have in this column over there. So I'm going to divide that by 100 to get the actual salary that this player uses up on average. So that's what we have there with Scotty, right? 30% of lineups are going to have Scotty at 12.7K. That means on average, a lineup is going to have that much salary allotted to a Scotty Scheffler. Now, I have my projections cut off at a certain number here because I've got to keep them behind the paywall. But all you have to do, right, is you type in sum, you add up all these numbers here, the whole way down to the bottom, right? Now I have a lot of them taken off here, so we can't necessarily do it together, but when you add all of those up, it better equal 600. Now, like I said, it's not going to equal 600 because we're only looking at the 8K plus range, but you also want to add up all of these, right? The ones that you multiplied and then you divide by 100. This needs to be equal to or less than $50,000, right? Because if it's more than $50,000, that means that your projections are too expensive, right? You have too many of the highly owned guys up there at the top end of the board. And if you only have $47,000 in the projections that you're looking at, well, then you're looking at the biggest slapdicks of them all, because no one on average is going to leave 2.5K on the table in their lineup. So that's the rant about ownership. The only reason that I'm going to give you guys the power, and it's not even that hard to figure out how to go out there and audit these projections, is because they need to do better, right? It's not like I care all that much, because if they continue to suck, I'm going to continue to call them out. And then I'm actually going to start attaching names to the call outs so that people know exactly the sites that are making these sort of mistakes. But for now, I'm going to give you guys the power to go out there and audit them yourself, because I'm sure some of them probably fixed it after I put out my tweet today. But if they haven't and they still have those incorrect projections out, then don't pay for them, right? Go out there, talk to the owner, send an email to whoever you guys need to, and get them to get on their shit and figure out what the hell that they're doing wrong. So that's what I'll say about ownership, because especially if you're using ownership as like one of the bigger parts of your process, like a lot of winning DFS players do, then having accurate ownership matters. In fact, it's probably the most important metric that you could possibly have. So if you have a projection system that is just fundamentally wrong when it comes to putting together your projections, then imagine how wrong your process is when it comes to putting together lineups, especially if you're like one of those bigger sites. I'm not going to name them by name, that has, you know, the ownership as a really big part of your process. Like, that's just, it's not a really good luck out there for a lot of those different sites. So let me catch up on chat. I need to get a sip of water. I knew we were going to do that rant at some point, but guys, I'm not trying to be a dick about it to those sites that are out there, but you've got to be better. It is not that hard to put together projections that are sound. And hey, if no one else is going to do it, then I'll do it. And I'll take all your subscribers from you, because I got to say, if you're an owner of one of those sites that doesn't know what the hell they're doing, I'm coming for you. I'm going to start calling you out by name. I do not give a fuck. What are you going to do? Call me out for defamation when I'm putting out facts, straight numbers from your site that are verifiably true? No, right? You have nothing that you can stand on. So I guess that's my warning to all those sites out there, is that if you don't have your shit together, well, you're going to hear it from me. Any love for McGreevy and Hoey as potential flyers? I love the form for McGreevy. I believe he's on the right side of tee times, but I guess let's double check that for you. Then Hoey, he was everyone's favorite last week because he was on the right side of the draw. Obviously went out there and ended up missing the cut. So let's check on both of those. So Hoey is PM wave, not really ideal when it comes to what you're looking for. Then McGreevy, who, by the way, I am playing, even if he's on the wrong side of things, he is an AM wave player. So yeah, between the two, McGreevy is definitely my favorite. He'll also carry slightly higher ownership between those two, but yeah, the form, and particularly the ball striking, is great on both. You're convinced half of DFS Twitter just plugs in random numbers for ownership? Actually, I'll tell you what they do, Ryan. They take established the runs ownership numbers and they copy and paste them is what they do, Ryan. I'm going to start calling out states. And by the way, Establish the Run actually had one of the better numbers of anyone in the industry. So what a lot of these other sites do is they take that base set of projections, from what I can tell, because they post theirs first and then those other ones come out after. It's kind of strange how it works like that. And they slightly adjust them, right? Now, some of these sites, when they made those adjustments, they didn't do it correctly, right? They went way above the salary or way below the salary, et cetera, but it's not random. I know where it's coming from. And like I said, the smoke's going to start coming out at some point, because it's a scam, right? If you're signing up for a site like that can't put together projections, it is a scam. It is just random numbers, like Ryan said there. Lazy content week, I agree with that. A lot of false information out there. Amen to that. He said, what do I think about Smalley and Grazerman? So I gave a little bit of my thoughts earlier on Grazerman, but I think he's a good, like, lower owned play over there in the 8K range. Smalley, a little bit higher owned. So I'd say if you're a big believer in the form for Smalley, he's definitely usable in lineups, but he's going to come with slightly higher ownership than maybe some of the other guys around him. Grazerman, though, I like what we have there. He said, thoughts on Echevarria? So he's a player in general that I'm higher on than most, I would say, Cody. So he's the kind of player that I play a lot more than other people. But because he was towards the top end of the leaderboard last week, it kind of feels like a I don't want to say like a terrible spot to go out there and play him, but it's sub-ideal just because there's going to be a lot more steam on him for this golf tournament than anyone over the last month. Anytime he has one of those spike rounds, you see people kind of flocking to that sort of play. So just keep that in mind. What's going on, Antonio? He said, is Davis Thompson a solid 9K pivot? Ownership wise, Kevin, yeah, you're getting a little bit of a pivot on that sort of player. I would say, though, because he's on the PM side, that he's maybe not my favorite. Like, if I was going to take a PM wave player, I still like myself some Tony Finau, maybe even a Sungjae Im, just because I think Sungjae's a better player than a Davis Thompson. But they accomplish the same thing with the ownership, right? They're all relatively low owned. So if you need a pivot, you need to find a way to kind of force in some differentiation. You know, whether it's a Davis Thompson you're playing, whether it's a Sungjae Im, like I'll probably have out there in a lot of my sort of lineups where I'm doing that. You're doing the same thing, right? So just, I guess, know why you're doing so. And yeah, I wish Sungjae was AM wave because I think he'd be the absolute nuts this week. He said, "Oi, let's have a week." Amen to that. He said last week he saw during one of the large companies with Sims that Burns was 0.7%, and that was 11 p.m. on a Wednesday. You said they had guys at 0.1% that were higher than 5. Yeah, man. I'm not gonna call any by name, but there's some that are just really bad out there. The ones that really grind my gears, because like you can put out projections that are incorrect. It's a projection. It's your opinion. Sites are allowed to get things wrong. I get things wrong all the time with my projections, right? But what I don't do is put out projections that physically cannot happen. That is a completely different type of mistake. So like, even if they're getting things wrong like that, James, like I can get slightly over it. I can't get over that other stuff. It is like, it's inexcusable. It's like they don't understand how DFS works, and they're putting together the projections that other people are using for their DFS process. It is wild to me. If you can't tell, it really got me riled up when I saw it today. He said, Greg, he said, in a single entry, is it good to just fade Rory and Chef? I don't know if I'd say it's wise to fade those two, Greg, but it is going to accomplish one thing, and one thing very strongly. You're going to get a ton of leverage to the rest of the field, because I was running some Sims before. I was trying to figure out what the hell is going to happen in like a single entry contest as opposed to some of the large field GPPs. And I have reason to think that between Scotty and Rory, that they're probably going to be like 80 to 90% combined owned over there in single entries. So like GPPs, I think that's going to be closer to 65%. That's at least where my numbers are putting it right now. I'd say large field GPPs, it's going to be a lot lower than the single entries, because single entries, people play tight, right? They play like nits, like they say over there in the betting community, right? Especially with poker. When somebody is just a little bit too tight with their range, they don't want to go out there and get as much action as other players. That's what happens in single entries, right? People turn into nits. They want to protect their bankroll a little bit, because normally the single entries are higher dollar contests, what they're entering in other spots. Those sort of players, if you can avoid them in that sort of contest, you're going to be talking about 10, maybe 15% of lineups that you're playing against. It'd be massive for leverage. So Zachary says, from a game theory, single entry, is this a week to just take a stand on Scotty and Rory and then full fade the other? So yeah, kind of a good question over there with Greg there. I think that the way that I would play it, Zach, is to take one or the other and then full fade the other, right? Just maybe play a Rory in the single entry and then find my 5 other players. I don't think you have to run it that way. Like if you go the fade of both guys up top, you can play some chalk in the 8-9K range, because you're not playing the 30%ers up there at the top end of the board. But if you play one of the two, it's also not a death sentence. The one thing I would say to kind of avoid in single entry is the lineups where you play both of those together, right? And then you try and get different down there, the 6K range is not something that you want to do. Is there a definitive harder 9 holes? So I don't know that off the top of my head, but I can double check that for you real quickly. I think it's the back 9, just because you do have some water in play. Typically, the back 9 at these courses is harder to begin with. Let's go over here to Data Golf. I was going to say something, but I won't. You probably guessed what I was going to say out there with them. But let's go over here to the 2-9. So if you take a look when it played 0.44 over par, the back 9 was clearly the harder side. Now, this could have been slightly wind direction based, but you can see on the back 9, there were 3 holes that played under par, and then 6 holes that ended up playing over. If you go to the one of the rounds where it played a little bit easier, it kind of looks like the same, right? Like you've got 2 holes over here playing almost half a stroke under. And then the back 9, sure, a couple playing 0.2 strokes under par, that sort of thing. But yeah, the back 9 is going to be the harder side. Now, if you're looking for a birdie streak, I kind of think that, at least based on what we're looking at here, that starting on 1 might be advantageous because you do have that par 5 over there at 8. 9 is, I don't want to call it gettable, but it played under par right out here in both the rounds that we're looking at. And then you've also got 10 over here that played under par to start the back. So that was the case also over there in round number 3. So yeah, the back 9's harder for sure. Now, I don't know if it's like that big a difference that you have to lean into it, but something to note. It's a great info tonight, by the way, on ownership. Yeah, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but it's just true, right? You said almost all the top guys are PM. Do I think that'll affect their ownership? Or will people not care about the weather edge because of last week? I think you're spot in line with what you said there towards the end, right? Because of last week, I don't think as many people are going to play the weather, and even people that are, right? I mentioned it over here in this live stream. I'm only doing it full on in 30% of my lineup. So I don't think it's going to have like a massive impact on the ownership, like maybe 2-3%, I'd say, for a lot of those players up top. But just to show you guys what he's talking about, he's completely right. Of the guys that are 9K plus, there's only a couple guys up here. Like you've got Wyndham, you've got a Minwoo Lee over there at $9,600. Then you've got Rory at $11,700. Now this 8K range, you have a few other guys to choose from. You've got a Grazerman, a McNeely, and yeah, I guess that's it. It really is only like 4 or 5 guys that you have towards the top end of the board that you can play. Yeah, they'll probably be a little bit higher owned than they otherwise would be, but I don't think it's so much that you have to jump off of it, because even last week, with what looked like a pretty definitive weather edge, I think it was only like 28% of lineups that went full out there with the 6-0. So with last week in everyone's minds, with a less definitive edge this week, it's going to be way less than that this time around. So I would say a small little difference, but it might not even be 2-3% on some of those players. Like it might even be less than that, just because of what happened last week. He said, appreciate my honesty, Luke. Great stuff, of course. Is there a nutted AM range for tomorrow? Do you mean like with tee times, Kim? Because if you do, like as early as you could possibly go off would be what I would say. Let me actually bring up the tee times so I can show you who some of those players are. Ben Griffin is one of the first players off, so he would be one of the guys that fits that description. But yeah, like because the winds kick up around 11, or that's when it's forecasted, and kick up over here for tomorrow, like if you can get off at 7 a.m., this is 8:20 Eastern time, by the way. So they're going off an hour earlier over there in the Central time zone. Like these guys would be the nutted AMT times, like Ben Griffin, your Novaks, your Ben Coles. The temperature is not going to be that crazy tomorrow. Like if we go over here to HRRR, you're talking about 67 degrees at 8 a.m. Like that is as comfortable can get. So I don't think it's the kind of slate where we're like worried about guys going off early because it's going to be so cold over there during the morning. These guys would be the absolutely nutted conditions. So like a Hoffman, a Meissner kind of stands out. Griffin's my favorite play out of all of them towards all these guys we have here towards the top. But like Taylor Montgomery, right? If he can hit some greens, he's always capable of making a whole bunch of punts for showdown. You got Grazerman going off at 742. Dunlop, Rory, he's obviously somebody you might want to consider over there in showdown as well. It'd be these sort of players as early as possible. And I wouldn't really have like a cutoff time. Like just the earlier, the better out there for showdown. And personally, I would only play AM guys tomorrow. Like if I was playing full out for showdown, which I won't, it's not really my thing over there for round 1 showdown. It would be a whole lot of exposure to those players though. What's going on, Joseph? You see, we got you in here 39 minutes late, but I've got to say, man, you're maybe the most consistent guy down there in chat for showing up every time. So I give you a hard time every time you show up late, but welcome on in, my man. I'm out here to the stream. So let me know if any questions that you guys have over there with the player pool. But I do want to go through some of the ownership towards the top, right? We've already done so in a lot of different cases, but I want to point out this 8-9K range, which, I mean, just look how spread out this is. That's what I want to show you over here in this portion of the board. Lowest owned player is Keith Mitchell. He's 8.7%. Highest owned player over here in the 8K range is 14% in the Taylor Pendrith. That is less than a 6% difference from your highest to your lowest owned player. And it's pretty much the same thing in this 9K, even 10K range, right? You've got at most 14.9% over there on a Wyndham Clark, and your lowest owned player up here is at 9.8% on a Jason Day. So other than Scotty or a Rory, all of these guys are pivot plays because the chalk isn't normally 15% owned over here with a Wyndham Clark, right? Normally a Wyndham, if he's going to be chalk of the 9K range, he's like 25% owned. So it is such a weird slate because of how they did the pricing with these top two players, where this 8-9K range is almost a dead zone. Like a lot of times you're talking about these guys at 15% just because everyone likes to go out there and spend all of your salary, but you can't really do that this week because if you take 2-3 guys up here in the 9K range, you can't play your Scotty or Rory. There's just no way to go out there and make that kind of lineup work. So it's I would say just play your guys over here in that 8-9K range. But like the other aspect is that if you're trying to take a shot on somebody who's like out of form, you don't have anyone who's like 5-6% owned, right? They've all got some sort of ownership coming around behind them, which to me makes them slightly worse plays. Like a lot of times there's pivot plays that are going to just be mega low owned, infinite leverage in this portion of the board. That's not the case on this sort of week. When you get down to the 7K range, the ownership does start to spread out a lot more. So you have some guys here like a Nap, for example, who I know we had somebody mention him before as one of their favorite plays. The analytics love him, by the way. Top 10 recent form, really good on overseed. I'm playing him out there in my 150 max pool, but he's like over 10% owned. In fact, he's getting close to 12% owned over there in large field GPPs. They've got a few other guys in this range that are also carrying quite a bit of ownership, and a lot of them are towards the top end of the 7Ks. Like, for example, Joe Highsmith, he's getting close to that 10% mark as well. But once you start to get down towards the bottom end of the 7K range here, you've got plenty of guys that you can take at 5% ownership, if not lower. So even if you're taking a Scotty Scheffler or a Rory in your lineup and you feel like, oh, wow, these guys are just so much higher owned than all of these other guys up top, like how could I possibly get enough leverage? You're going to have plenty of guys down towards the bottom. And, you know, if you're using a Scotty at $12,700, it is going to further force you into that 6K range, which is going to give you another chance to go out there and get that differentiation to the field. So I guess that's the thing with these players. And the other side of that is, right, like if you avoid Scotty and Rory, well, there's no one in the 10K range to even go out there and play. And now you have to play a balanced build, right? Unless you're going to go out there and leave a whole bunch of salary on the table, you're going to be living with 3, maybe even 4 guys up here from 8K plus. And if you're taking 4 guys up here, here's the other side of the ownership that a lot of people don't think about. Now you've got like 4 guys guaranteed in your lineup that are at least 10% owned, or at least on average, right? Going to be 10% owned, because your lowest owned player here is a Jason Day and then a Keith Mitchell. They're 8.7%. So what that does is that even if you're getting the pivots in this range, right, you're taking that more balanced approach, 4 spots in your lineup are 10% owned, which that product ownership is not as low as you would think it's going to be. In fact, even if you take like a 30% owned player like a Rory or a Scotty up here towards the top, and let's say you have one other guy who's maybe like 10% in that lineup, if you have a couple sub 2%ers as your like plays down there in that 6K range, that product ownership can easily be lower than what you have with the guys that are all like 10% owned. So that's why using product ownership is so important when it comes to building your lineups, because it gives you a better sense of your actual chance to duplicate with other people in your contest. My usual rule is I want, if you take 1 over the total amount of entries out there in your contest, I like to have less than that percentage over there for my product ownership rate. So that way, all the lineups that I'm entering over there in that contest have a theoretical dupe rate of 1 or less over there in that sort of contest. So that's how I go out there and handle it in my process. But just because, and I guess I point this out to show you, like just because you're fading these 2 guys up top does not mean you're going to have all the leverage that you need. I feel like that's a common misconception when it comes to these sort of circumstances, is that just because you're fading like the 2 chalkiest players on the slate does not mean that you can just play whoever the hell you want with the rest of your lineup. A few other players I want to point out. So first, we got Kurt Kitayama here at $7,600. I've got him at 6.4% owned. He is obviously on the right side of the tee time draw, which is going to be key with a lot of these different players that we go through. But he's been in a downstretch lately, a lot of really errant drives that have been costing him shots to the field. But luckily here at this municipal course, he could hit the ball all over planet Earth and get away with it, with the exception for 2 drives. And because the water isn't played down the right on both of those drives, I think it's a pretty good golf course for Kurt, who hits hits that predominant fade. Right? If you're a fader of the golf ball, he can aim to the left side of that fairway, maybe even outside of the left side of that fairway, and just rip that fade back into the center. So I really like how he sets up for this sort of course. Iron play before the last few weeks was one of the best of anyone in the field. Now he's fallen off over his last, I think it's like 4 to 6 round sample size where he hasn't been playing his best golf. But before that, you're talking, excuse me there, guys, you're talking about one of the best iron players that you have in the entire world. So he's the kind of bounce back spot that I'll take at a little bit lower ownership. I've got guys like Riley at closer to like 8-9%. I already told you guys about Jake Knapp a little bit over that 10% ownership mark. Now, if you're starting with like a 30%er up top, maybe another 10%er in the 8-9K range, maybe you don't want to be living with guys like Jake Knapp right down here in that 7K range. That's where guys like Kurt Kitayama come in a little bit handier to give you a little bit different to the field. We also got a Nicholas, I thought it was Nicholas Norgard-Bowler, who, by the way, I am playing him this week. So that was a Freudian slip, I guess, thinking that he was the player we had as a yes. But it's Austin Eckroat here at $7,200. Another AM Wave player that I just think is underrated. The form has not quite been there lately. The same kind of thing as a Kurt Kitayama, but he's on the right side of the draw. He's decently owned, like he's 5.3%. I don't want to call him like a true diamond in the rough or anything like that, because you do have a few guys in this range that are closer to like 2-3% ownership, but 5% is a hair lower than some of the other guys in this range, like a Castillo, a Ryan Gerard, even an Andrew Novak with some of his form lately, are a little bit higher owned than you hear with an Eckroat. And Eckroat's a tour winner. Eckroat's a guy who's really good with his mid to long irons. And while he's not a bomber off the tee, he does gain strokes with his off the tee play because he's about average with the distance and then hits a whole bunch of fairways. So it's maybe not the perfect course fit for him, but we've got to remember at a certain point just how good some of these players are. And, a tour winner like Eckroat is, I think, somebody we don't want to completely overlook. We've also got a Jesper Svensson out there in a few lineups. Jesper is extremely long off the tee, has all the off the tee power that we'd be hoping for. Some solid form during the fall swing, or during the Florida swing, I should say. And those were at courses that really didn't fit his game. He's a little bit of a sprayer off the tee, not the most accurate driver. So we try to play him at courses where you have more of that room. And that's exactly what we're getting over here in Houston. So, and you can see him there at that sub 5% number, just like the other few guys that we've talked through, a way to get a little bit different to the rest of the field. And we already talked about Pot Guider on Monday, so I won't go through that completely again. Same thing with Højgaard. Højgaard, by the way, is on the PM side, so that is a sub-ideal, I'd say, over there with the tee time, but I'm still playing him in a few lineups, especially the ones where I'm not going out there and full stacking it, like I was saying it before. Same thing with Pot Guider. He's also on the PM side, so in the weather stack lineups, he will not be making it into the mix. But guys like Chris Gotterup will. Gotterup is down here at $6,600. He's only 1.2% owned over there in contest, and he's got all the power you'd want, right? One of the longest players that you have in this sort of field. And sure, the form hasn't been great, but the Florida swing eats up a lot of these long power players. And if you're playing form this week like it's the absolute gospel, then you're asking for a kick in the nuts, because this is the sort of golf course that is just so vastly different than what you had for the 3-4 weeks prior to this, that if you're using that form as the number one metric that you're looking at this week, it's going to take you off of a lot of really good bounce back candidates. And guys like Chris Gotterup, those guys that sprayed it off the tee recently are the perfect candidates to go out there and have that bounce back. Last year, by the way, the guy that I took that was kind of like a Chris Gotterup was an Alejandro Tosti, who we bet for an outright. We mentioned on this live stream last year. I think maybe not exactly to this day, but pretty close to exactly a year from now. I mentioned that Tosti, with his off the tee distance, the fact that he's a decent mid to long iron player and plays well at easier golf courses, could maybe win this thing. And what did he do? Right, he was in the final pairing right out there last year. This year's Alejandro Tosti is Chris Gotterup, who has already won an alternate field event, right? He's shown us the ability to go out there and win a PGA Tour event. This would be a step up being a regular PGA Tour event over here at the Houston Open, but it's the same kind of setup that he went out there and won on. Wide open course where that power can be a huge asset. And that because he's down here in that 6K range, he's 1% owned, giving you all that leverage you could possibly need. So that's what I would say about the ownership, the game theory this week, is that you kind of got to treat it differently than most, especially because the ownership up top is so wonky. And it's not only what that does with your 8, 9, and 10K range players, right? It's the effect further down the board, which, to get back and I guess to tie this into the rant that we had earlier, that's why having ownership projections is so important, right? Because maybe you get the ownership right on a Scotty Scheffler or Rory, but if your average salary used is like $52,000, that sort of thing, you're going to think that the guys here in the 8, 9K range are going to be like 15% owned, because that's what those kind of sites have. They have guys in this range, like 15 to 20% owned, like they would normally be, which, like I said, most weeks, not a huge issue. Normally they are like 15 to 20% owned, especially the guys that are getting some ownership, but that is not the case when you have those two pieces of mega chalk at the top end of the board. So just make sure that you guys have a proper set of projections to look at. Of course, right, if you want my projections for any given week, those can be found over there on my Patreon page. There's a link in the description of this video to go out there and join that. It's only $15 a month, which I've got to say, compared to every single site that I compare to today, is cheaper than the projections that they're posting. So not only are all those sites ripping you off when it comes to their projections, but they're charging you more out there for PGA projections. So if you guys want to find everything that I post for every single week, that's main slate, it's rounds 2 through 4 showdown. I do ownership out there for rounds 2 through 4 in particular. Some of these websites, by the way, will just copy and paste their projections from main slate and then go out there and throw them out there for showdown for rounds 2 through 4. You're not going to get that half-assed kind of shit around here, right? You're going to get projections that are catered to every single round, the weather edge out there for any given round, as well as ownership to account for that as well. So again, link in the description to go out there and check that out. We'll go over any last second questions that you guys have, and then we're going to go through some contest selection and a little bit of lineup construction as well. We hopping into prop soon. You said no rush at all, just wasn't sure. Yes, Patrick, that'll be in about like 5-10 minutes. So I'm sorry to have you waiting there, man. But yeah, we get to that towards the end. Taking no prisoners tonight. You like it? The lovely jubbly. That is still my favorite meme, my favorite gif out there, man. Hit them with all the lovely jubblies you can. So yeah, no news, Brian, out there in the putting grip since today. I haven't seen anything, Brian, which I know we mentioned that on the Discord earlier. If we haven't seen any news about his putting grip, it probably hasn't changed, because he is such a popular guy. I mean, he's the world #1. Everyone is watching him like Tiger. I mean, maybe not quite as closely as Tiger, but pretty much like he's Tiger Woods. If he changes anything, we're going to know about it, right? Whether it's the grips on his clubs, whether it's the bag that he's using, right? We're gonna know about those kind of changes. So he's probably still rocking that ugly ass saw grip, which, dude, it is terrible. He's got to move on from that at some point. He said, forgot to mention it, but Richard Mansell won on Singapore, his first win holding off Nakajima. By the way, if you know about Richard Mansell, he got brought up on a live stream. I think it was 2 years ago. We had a question about whether to play him. Yeah, I'm actually really happy for him, man, because he went through a little down stretch over the last year or so, at least from my understanding, right? Wasn't playing the kind of golf like he first had when he came out on tour. Then he got out there and got a win. So it's funny that you mentioned that, Jack. When I saw that on my DP World Tour app, I actually thought about that guy, which I don't think we've seen him in the chat for a while. I forget his name actually at this point. But yeah, the Richard Mansell truther from 3 years ago, he was finally right. Hey, if you played him every single week since then, maybe he's like half of his money back, something like that. But hey, you got to win eventually, right? Grazerman nutting this weekend. I could see Grazerman playing well. He's the ownership's not out of hand. So if you like yourself a little bit of a pivot, you could get there. He said, thoughts on Doug Gim as an AM pivot? Yeah, he's in plays in my player pool, so I'm using him, Anthony. Course fit isn't ideal, I'd say. I really like to play him at shorter, more positional golf courses. This is more of like a big hitter's ballpark, right? Wide open off the tee, that sort of thing. So, I mean, he's like not an ideal play here by any means, but he's low owned and he's on the AM wave, like you said. So that's enough for me. Is Griot going to cook up a made cut this week? Seems to be turning a corner. Let's look at the stats, Ross, because I didn't get there myself, but I could totally see it because Griot is just a better player than we really give him credit for. Or at least I think a lot of people do. And your take on him turning the corner is exactly right. I mean, he's gaining off the tee, which for a while that had been a huge problem for him. I mean, he was losing like half a stroke per round out there for a while. The iron play, which historically, like if you went back 2-3 years ago on Griot, iron play was what this guy was known for pretty much every single week. That has surprisingly been holding him back a little bit. So yeah, I'm not completely against the play. Like this is the best that Griot has set up for probably 6 months to a year. So if there's going to be a spot to go out there and get over the field on him or try and be early to an Emiliano Grillo, I think that's a decent play. I'm not going to be there myself, Ross, but I kind of wish I was now that I'm thinking about it. What do I think about Highsmith? Would I go over to him over Kevin Yu? Let me actually double check to see if I have Highsmith in my pool. I can't remember that one off the top of my head. I do know that I am playing Kevin Yu, so that's why I want to double check between the two. Yeah, I like Kevin Yu just a little bit more. And the reason why I'm looking at my other projection sheet now where I have the ownership in front of me is because Kevin Yu is lower owned and Highsmith is the better projecting player. In fact, I have Highsmith projecting for 6.5 more fantasy points, which is it's like a birdie difference, a little bit over a birdie difference out there from player to player. Actually, sorry, for main slate, it's almost 2 birdies difference out there with that 6 fantasy point difference. But Kevin Yu, I don't have him at quite half the ownership as a Joe Highsmith, but I've got Kevin Yu at sub 7% ownership over there in GPP. So that's why I prefer Kevin Yu, is just because he's a little bit of a sneakier play, in my opinion. But I think both are decent plays, right? I don't want to talk you off of them or anything like that. Let's go through some contest selection. So over here in DraftKings, a lot of the contests aren't really that close to filling, which at this point of the week is kind of surprising. The big $20, for example, it has 11,000 entries remaining. Some people may say that it's overlay alert, but that's just not going to happen. That will for sure fill before tomorrow morning. Same thing with the big $5. You can see this contest here. It's a 150 max and it has a little bit more entries remaining. So what is it, like 14,000, a little bit less than 14,000 out there remaining. This will fill, but probably like a couple hours out there before lock. So these contests, I guess they were pretty decently sized this week, but I've got to say a little bit surprising that there's not more attention on it, given the fact that there's not a lot of the big sports going on. But if we take a look at a lot of the contests available, I mean, they're pretty typical what we usually see. If you're only entering a few lineups, I always try and push you guys towards some of these single entries. This one's a little bit too top heavy for me, but if you go down to this 30K one, it's I guess it's the same ratio to first place. So they're both a sixth over there to first place. So not an ideal single entry payout structure, but it's better than the 25%, 30% to first place that you get for some of those GPPs. You got some tiers contests there, which I will never play tiers. That is just not my thing. The people that play tiers just must be kind of special, I'd say, out there. It's just, I don't understand I don't even know the word for it. The appeal, I guess, to playing in tiers, because I like dealing with the salary. It lets you be more creative, right? You're not like have to hunker down out there into 5 or 6 different ranges. It's just so much more creative. There's a lot more you can do, right? You can leave salary on the table when you're building classic lineups. That's why I try and stay away from it. But here's the $44. This is an 80 entry, so a lot bigger than the ones they do out there for Showdown. Not much to say from the lineup construction, the contest selection perspective. A lot of the same kind of contests that we're used to seeing. But when putting together lineups, this is where things get a little bit more interesting. And, we talked about the weather before, right? If you're going to play a weather edge, that's obviously one way you can really go out there and create lineups. But if you're going to do so, if you're going to play that weather edge, do keep in mind that a lot of the people are going to start with the same players. Like a Rory McIlroy, by the way, if you're going to start with an AM PM wave stack, he's going to be used in like 80% of those lineups, like at least. Like if you're going with the guys up top that are AM wave, like it's either him or you start with a Minwoo Lee down here at $9,600. And I could see it being like an 80-20 split, right, between those two different players. So if you're starting with a Rory, maybe your second man in is, let's say, a McNeely at $8,300. Maybe you throw in a Thagala who's also AM wave there at $8,000. You've got a 30%er, a 10%er, then another 10%er down here. Your last 3 spots are going to be where most of your leverage is coming in. And the issue that you have is not only do you have a guy that's super highly owned out there with Rory, same thing with McNeely, Thagala, is that in AM wave only lineups, because there's only 5 guys to choose from towards the top end of this board, the actual duplication of these 3. So like, let's go back to the product ownership thing. So you know how I said earlier that I like to take the 1 over the total amount of entries, and then that'll be like my product ownership cap out there for any given lineup. The issue with a wave edge like this is that the actual like amount of people that enter this combination of lineups is going to be way like orders of magnitude higher than what the product ownership would say. So like what I mean by that is that the product ownership of these lineups, and I'm just going to completely make up a number here because I'm not going to do the mental math on multiplying those 3 numbers, but let's say there's a 5% chance that you'd have this exact same combination of players, let's say with the product ownership. In actuality, because of everyone going out there and taking, AM wave stacks, it's not like the entire field's going to do that, but of the people that do, they're all going to end up on the same sort of lineups. The actual people that go out there and enter this might be like 15%, right? And like I said, I just make it up numbers, right, to give you guys that perspective there. But that's the idea, is that because there are a subset of people that are going to be playing the same sort of player pool, that you're going to have to be a little bit extra careful if you start with this sort of lineup. So down here in the 7K range, while you might be okay taking like another 5% or another like 7%er with 2 of your last 3 spots, we've probably got to go sub 5% on all of these sort of plays. So let's see, a Kitayama at 6%, like you might be able to get away with that one, right? We mentioned slightly lower owned Eckroat there at about 5% as well. Your last man in here, even though you have a 5, a 6%er in there with these two, I might want to leave some salary on the table just to make sure that I have some extra leverage in this lineup, because a lot of people don't think about that when it comes to the Weather Edge and building their lineups, is that the people that are building those Weather Edge lineups are going to get forced onto the same people, right? Whereas the people that are playing without a Weather Edge, right, are going to be on the whole other set of different players up there towards the top end of the board. So just something to keep them, keep in mind when you're going out there and building lineups this week. If you're building without that sort of Weather Edge, it takes a lot of that confusion away, because, if you're not going out there and fully, 5-1 or 6-0 stacking towards the AM PM wave, you're not going to run into the same sort of issues that you were before. So that's what I usually like to mention when it comes to the weather angle. Let's go over any last second DFS questions, and then we're going to talk into the prop side. Said nice rant. You said the truth. That's the thing, man. When I go on rants, it's going to be the truth. It's going to be extremely honest. And that there's probably going to be some swear words in there too. I can promise you that. He said, Brian says you like Bridgman again, higher ownership though. That's the issue for me, Brian. And I was a Bridgman truther last week. I had him in a whole bunch of lineups, which is great, but I don't know if I can do it. So I'm going to stay away because of that ownership. I just think that, the market's gone a little bit too high, both from the price tab and the ownership angle out there on Jacob. But I wish him all the best luck, because he made me a lot of money last week. So even if he plays well and he screws me, I can't be mad at him, right? You got opening day, the Sweet 16, NHL and NBA. You're still in for golf, but definitely a lot of other action. Yeah, I suppose so. But in terms of like DFS, like people don't play DFS for March Madness, at least to my knowledge. It's not a very big market for that. You said late season NHL and NBA. Those are always going on though, right? Like, I don't know what's different about this week where they made the contest different, but I guess I hear you out there with some March Madness stuff. Your boy Nick Dunlop is looking to turn it around. I could see it, Prep. It's a good golf course off the tee for him, right? Wide open off the tee, you can hit it a long way. How many syllables will be in the last name of the winner? You're guessing 3. What is Scheffler? Scheffler 2, maybe 2. McIlroy 3. I hope it's 3. I hope it's 3, Paul, but I have a feeling it might be 2, right? If it's not 3, because Scheffler has a good ring to it. Kicking ass tonight, deep dive Celinda for you. I appreciate you, Jay Grimes. Yeah, let's go through that. So I'm going to go back to the projection tab so I can show you some of the shots gained metrics. He's fallen off a bit, right? He's had a few events where he hasn't had his fastball, but he really sets up well for this track. He's a bomber, hits the ball a long way. He deals with some accuracy issues, kind of like a pot guider, right? He's going to gain a shit ton of strokes. When it comes to his shots gained off the tee, it's all about what happens with the irons. Now, the putter has been a big problem for him recently too. So he's going to have to flip those 2 categories. But if you told me before the week started that ahead of time, we knew that either the approach play or the putting was going to flip. Like even if it's only like a half a stroke per round that he's gaining in one of those 2 categories, then I'd almost lock him, right? I'd almost go, okay, I'll take him in every single lineup then, because we know he's going to gain off the tee. He's a pretty solid short game player, and let alone the chance he goes out there and flips the other category, right over there with the putter. So I think he's a good low-owned GPP play is what I would say about Celinda. You're only in 200 entries, so ownership's not a biggest deal. Yeah, so if that's the case, Brian, with the Bridgman, then you could totally play him in, because the only argument against him, right, is that maybe he's played a lot of golf recently. That's really pushing it, right, at that point. That's being nitpicky. And then the ownership angle. So if you take the ownership out of it, I'm all for it. Had to get creative instead of just saying who is going to win. Yeah, I've got to say, I think Rory's my pick to win. I bet him out there at plus 750. But man, if it's not Rory, it's probably Scotty. I got to say, crazy how McIlroy, by the way, is the shorter word, yet it's 3 syllables, and then freaking Scheffler is longer and it's only 2. English language for you, huh? All right, let's go through some prop stuff. So I apologize for taking so long with the prop stuff, but we had a lot to talk about with DFS. By the way, if you're only here for the DFS stuff, go ahead and smash the like button if you guys haven't already. By the way, any DFS questions, I will still go through them, but our main focus for the next 20 minutes or so is going to be on underdog and prize picks. But if you are hopping on out of here because you were only here for fantasy, I still appreciate you guys stopping by and all of that. The only thing I ask, like I said, is that you smash that like button and that you stop on by for rounds 2 and 4 and what we do on our DFS and prop stuff. Let's go through the prop averages. So this is from last year, 2024. Course had the shorter rough last year, so that made it play a little bit easier than what we were used to seeing. And for Saturday and Sunday, it was also a little bit of a softer golf course because they got some rain over there on Friday. So rounds 1 and 2, where it wasn't soft, it played like half a stroke over par for both days. Rounds 3 and 4 is where it played like half a stroke to a stroke under par out there for the final 2 rounds. So with the fact that it hasn't gotten truly wet yet, or that's going to happen on Friday when they have all that flooding coming through, I think tomorrow is actually going to play pretty difficult, especially when we take a look at the HRRR model here. And in the afternoon, it looks like it's going to be pretty windy. You're talking about 20, maybe 25 miles an hour of wind gusts, sustained winds, and maybe even some rain that they have to play through. So I think if you're going to take anything for the PM wave for tomorrow, it's some fades. And the main one that really stuck out to me that you guys may have seen, and you saw the article I did over there and bet the number, but it was an under on Steven Jaeger pars, who does have the PM wave tee time. You can see over there, excuse me, it has the 2:14 p.m. tee time. So that's a 1:14 over there in the central. That's going to be what the winds are really starting to kick up. Might even have to play through a little bit of early rain. And last year, this is the entire event, right? Right about this 1 over par scoring average that you had here. You can see the bogey or worse average was 3.22 per round. In fact, it was 3.22 per round for the birdie average as well. So kind of rare that you have them at the exact same number out there in both categories. But tomorrow, I think it's going to play harder than what you have for these averages because you have that wind in play. It's not going to be as soft as what you have for the rest of the week. I think it might play like a half a stroke over par over there in the PM wave. Now, the morning guys, I do think it's going to play easier than what you have in the afternoon. So morning guys, I could see it playing like around even par, maybe even just a hair under par out there for some of your early players. So the other side of what I took was an over on Ben Griffin birdies, who that one, look, I thought it got taken off. Thank God. That one didn't get taken off the board. But he's the first group off, going off of hole number 10. So we were looking at the tee times a little bit earlier, right? He's going off at 7:20 local. So he's going off with essentially perfect conditions this entire round. The first 4 or 5 hours of the morning are going to be ideal over there tomorrow. And he's minus 135 for his over on birdies on Draftkings. So if you're a believer in the plus EV value, you have a little bit of that over there with Ben Griffin. And though we don't have a line for comparison with Jaeger, you do have Wyndham Clark, who, in my opinion, is clearly the better player, right, between Wyndham Clark and Steven Jaeger. Wyndham is going off in the morning, so he has the better conditions. And on a site like Caesars and on DraftKings, for that matter, he's at the same number on both sites. He's minus 145 out there for his over at 2.5 bogeys. So, by the way, an over at 2.5 bogeys is the same thing as an under at 15.5 pars or better. So even though we don't have Steven Jaeger on those two different books to go out there and compare to, I would say that if, Wyndham Clark is minus 145, right, out there in our favor, that Jaeger would be at least minus 150 in that same sort of direction. So that's why I like those two props in particular. And just because I feel nice over here for round 1, we're going to make it a 4-leg slipper. We're going to make it a 10x payout because I don't know. You can make it the 10x if you want to. You can split it up into a couple of 2-mans if you want to as well. But I like this Harry Hall over on birdies as well. So he's also an early tee time. So you can see there at 9:37 Eastern. That's an 8:37 local tee time over there with Harry Hall. So also getting the softer conditions to deal with. And Harry Hall last year was a top 5 birdie maker on all the PGA Tour. And in 2025, so far this season, he's a top 10 birdie maker out there on the PGA Tour. So you're talking about somebody that makes a lot more birdies than his peers. He's got the right side of tee times to go out there and work with. And kind of like Steven Jaeger, we actually don't have a line to compare to for Ben Griffin, which is, I don't know if it's an issue, but I guess it's sub-ideal, right, on those sort of props. But if Ben Griffin was minus 135 for the over, I mean, what would Harry Hall be? Because Ben Griffin, by the way, it's not like he's a bad birdie maker, but he was like number 50 on tour last year. This year, he's like top 30 on tour when it comes to birdie or batter percentage. So solid, but he's not really elite in the category, right? Harry Hall is elite. He was top 5 on all the tour last year. He's top 10 on all the tour here for a birdie or better percentage this year. So if Ben Griffin was minus 135 over, Harry Hall is probably also at least minus 150 odds if you had that line for comparison. And the other prop to go ahead and make it a 10x payout is this under on Michael Kim pars or better, who last year was a slightly better bogey avoidance player than Steven Jaeger. By the way, also worth noting with Jaeger that last year he was number 132 on tour when it came to bogey avoidance. So one of the worst players in all the PGA Tour when it came to avoiding bogeys. Michael Kim is a lot better. He was 50 on tour last year, I believe, if memory serves me correctly, in all of 2024 when it comes to bogey avoidance. The issue with Michael Kim, though, is that he hasn't had a great track record at this course. And of his last 8 rounds, he has made the cut here the last 2 years. He's gone over this line, though. Sorry, under this line, I should say. Over 2.5 bogeys is what I was thinking in 5 of his 8 rounds, right? So even with him making the cut both years, he's gone over this or under. I keep saying the wrong thing. You get this thing. He hit this line in 5 of those 8 rounds. And now, if you guys saw his tweet over there on Monday, he said he was dealing with some back and neck pain. So he's dealing with a little bit of an injury. Maybe that's why he missed the cut at the Players. Maybe that's why last week, even though he made the cut, it wasn't his best start out there on tour. So it wouldn't surprise me if he had a down week here, because it hasn't really traded him that nicely over the years to begin with. So if you took those, it would be a 10x payout for those 4. What I ended up doing for my exposure is I took 2 slips, right? I took these top 2 for a 3x payout, and I took these bottom 2 out there for a 3x payout too. So if you want to mix them together, if you want to go for broke out there with the 10x, then, obviously do whatever you want right out there with your different lineups. But that's the idea over there for tomorrow, is that I'm trying to kind of play both sides, right? Morning, I could see being kind of scoreable, but afternoon is when I think those conditions are going to deteriorate a little bit. Let's see. Whole locations just got posted. Okay. I'll have to take a look after I get off the live stream here. How are the ownership numbers projected? So it's a good question, Joe. I do them via an algorithm that I have done. So I don't have to go in like person by person and adjust it all that much. It's based on projection. A lot of it is based on whether the guy is popping out there in my numbers, because I do it based on form. So I don't want to give away too much about my process, because I don't need these other sites taking homework or taking notes of what I'm doing and then going out there and improving it. I would love for them to still just suck at their jobs, to go out there and suck at putting together the ownership. So I'll leave it there. There's an algorithm, Joe. It's a quite involved one. I've been working on for like 5 years. The more I see my content, the more you love it. Said, keep on going on. I appreciate the kind words, Julio. And yeah, that's the end of the live stream here. So I'll stall here for another minute. If you guys have any last second questions, I'll give you guys a chance to go ahead and throw those down in chat. In the meantime, though, I'll bring up those pins real quick, right? I know we had the comment about those. We're not going to have enough time to fully deep dive them. I've got to get some dinner after this. I've 8:30 reservation. Luckily, it's only 5 minutes away, so you should be good on that front. But I do want to take a look at these and go over any of those questions you've got. If you just don't have any questions and you are hopping on out of here, smash that like button if you guys haven't already. But let's look at these pins. So like 1, it's 9 paces from the side and 10 on. Like that one isn't that protected. 2 is that back right corner can be a little bit devilish, but like 4, it's 9 paces from the right. 5 is 7 paces from the right. This golf course can be really tricky when they start pushing everything towards the edges, because kind of like a Pinehurst, and by the way, that's why Pinehurst number 2 is one of the comp courses that I used for this week. When you get towards the edges, everything runs off. So if you have pins that are like 3-4 paces from the side, so for example, like 8, right? It's only 4 paces from the side over there. It is a front pin, so that is going to help players on that sort of hole, but it's tricky when you get really close to the sides. But what you see with a lot of these pins is that they're like at most, or at least like 5 paces out there from the side, and that there's a lot that are like 8 to 10 paces, maybe even more. Like look at that, that's 12 paces from the side over there at 14. It kind of looks like they're going to take it easy on these players, which you might expect with the fact that they're going to get some wind tomorrow afternoon, and so they're expecting some rain during the PM wave as well. So it kind of looks like they're trying to make it, maybe so that they can finish play. There is 154 players that they have to get in out there tomorrow. These pin locations, though, are going to get a lot harder as the week goes on. Now, they may choose to do so on Saturday, Sunday, right, when the weather conditions are expected to be a lot better. But for now, they're not using a lot of those brutal pins. Like the only one I can see here that looks overly hard, like 16, that one's pretty hard. Like 2, I'd say hole 2 is tucked there in that back right corner. But outside of those 2, it's a pretty average setup, I would say. Alrighty, guys, that is all I've got out here for the live stream this week. I'm a sweaty mess. I just came off the golf course to go out here and do this live stream, so I've got to freshen up a little bit before I head out to this dinner reservation. But best of luck with all the exposure that you guys are getting to. That's over there on the DFS side or over there on the prop side as well. And for all the underdog and prize pick slips that I'm taking, to this point, I've only entered those 4 props. So that is all the exposure that I currently have in for Thursday. But with anything I add over there tomorrow morning, right after we see the golf course and conditions over there, the morning wave, there's probably going to be some stuff I add over there for the PM. And of course, out there for rounds 2 through 4 as well. Patreon page has all those slips posted on it too. So for all of that, make sure to join the prop tier. Prop tiers, where all the underdog and prize pick stuff is. Whereas the DFS tier that I have for golf, that's where all the Draftkings stuff is, right? For DFS, projections, that sort of thing. So based on what you guys are looking for out there in the content, join the tier that is right for you if that's something that you guys are looking for in terms of extra content. But it'll give you my take on every single player that is playing, every piece of exposure I'm going at from the betting side, and it helps support the channel as well, right? If you guys don't want to run your projections through a site out there that is scamming you based on your projections, that can't even put together just the fundamentals when it comes to projected ownership, then support a site that is, right? It's just me. It's not a whole team of people that are putting together these projections. I work rather hard to go out there and do the best job that I can. If you want to support a company like that is also very transparent about how to audit their own projections, like a lot of those sites, they're not going to teach you how to go through it. And they're not going to show you how to go out there and make sure they're doing a good job. I will, because I'm an open book, where I'm very transparent about what I do. I know I'm not perfect, far from it. No one is perfect out there. I just don't like that some of the sites kind of pretend that they are sometimes. So that's all I'll say about the projections this week. Best of luck with all the exposure that you guys are getting to. I want to see some of your names towards the top end of those GPPs. I want to see us cashing out on maybe a whole 10x slip out there with those 4 different props. Rounds 2 through 4 showdown will be over there on the Ship It Nation YouTube channel. Rounds 2 through 4 prop and betting live streams, those will be over here on my YouTube channel. So stay tuned into all my social media channels, X, Twitter, all of that sort of stuff out there for the announcements, out there for those given live streams. But the best way to stay notified is to subscribe, turn on that notification bell so you know exactly when the content is going up. And let's have ourselves a week out there.